Chapter 22. He was taken aback upon hearing his mother's voice from the receiver. "Chucky, your mother is coming back." Chuck Cannon was bewildered. He had never seen his mother in his entire life, seemingly living abroad the first time she called him. He quickly asked her when she was coming back. "In a few days. I'll come first, your dad will stay here." He was teary-eyed and asked her what she was going to do when she came back after being abroad for so many years. His mother's response was short and simple. "I'm buying everything." Chuck chuckled at this answer. Just what was she planning to buy? "I'll have to end the call here, wait for me then," his mother said. "Will you recognize me?" Chuck was curious. After all, they have never met each other before. To be more accurate, he was the one who had never seen them before. "Silly child, you are my son. Why won't I recognize you? I have to go, see you." Chuck's mother hung up in a hurry. Maybe she was busy. Chuck was looking forward to it. He couldn't start to imagine how wealthy his mother was. She had already given him $15 million just a few days ago. What in the world was she going to buy when she came back? It was beyond his imagination. What if she bought a company and made him the general manager? Chuck's imagination drifted off further. At this moment, Zelda Main was walking back to the car. Her long legs slipped into the seat beside him, and he couldn't help asking what she and Yvette talked about. He was only worried that Zelda would reveal his secret that he was supposed to be showing up to meet Yvette yesterday. If that was the case, Yvette would have guessed easily that he was the baller. "Nothing much." Zelda shook her head. Chuck fidgeted nervously in his seat, but there was nothing he could do. As Zelda drove them both out of the university compound, his eyes fell on Yvette, who was staring at their car. Strangely, she didn't look angry at all. Perhaps what Zelda had said to her had nothing to do with Chuck at all. As for what they actually talked about, only God will know. Still, Yvette seemed to have a complicated expression on her face. He squinted to check. Yep, she was feeling a bit complicated indeed. Chuck urged himself to stop thinking about it. Unbeknownst to him, Laura Jean had witnessed Chuck getting on and getting driven off in such a fancy car. She was blown away and even more envious. Why does he have so many rich friends? Why didn't she know any? But fortunately, she knew one recently. Laura checked her messages expectantly. After seeing the baller's contact, she felt a sense of relief. She curled her lips and raised a hand to take a selfie. She took a photo of her showing a little cleavage and sent it to the baller. In the message, it said, "I'm going out." Chuck was stupefied by the incoming message. Why was Laura sending sexy photos of herself to him? Laura? She turned back to see who was calling her and immediately felt nauseous. It was Conrad Lee, who abandoned her yesterday. How dare he show his face in front of her? "How dare you come here?" Laura was furious. Conrad came to apologize with a bunch of flowers in his hand. "Laura, please don't be angry, I had no choice last night. If my father knew that I had offended Zelda, then what? I am your girlfriend. When I was hit, you didn't even defend me." Even Chuck Cannon was better. Laura glared at him. Conrad grimaced at her remark. He didn't know how Chuck befriended Zelda, but no one could deny that Conrad himself was from a wealthy home. His pocket money was in the 10,000s every month. In comparison, what did Chuck have? Conrad felt humiliated at the comparison between him and Chuck. "How did you know he is better? Did you sleep with him?" Conrad retorted sharply. "I don't want to talk to you." Laura turned around and left, annoying Conrad. No wonder Laura was fine today. She must have slept with Chuck last night. Knowing that he got cheated on by the jerk Chuck, Conrad couldn't contain his anger anymore. If she slept with someone who was way better than him, he would have no qualms, but Chuck? Who the hell did he think he was? He chased after Laura and grabbed her by the hand. Laura was already furious about what had happened last night. She raised her hand and slapped Conrad, whose face turned a bright red immediately after. The red palm print looked out of place on his face. When he heard the sound of students laughing nearby, looking at their squabble, he finally exploded. "Laura Jean, how dare you slap me? We've already broken up. Since you're not still over it, what's wrong with me slapping you? Let me be honest with you, I have a new boyfriend now, and he's someone who owns a $2 million car compared to your disgrace of a car. If you make me angry again, I'll get my boyfriend to ask people to beat you up." Laura threatened. Conrad's brow furrowed. "A $2 million car? When did you get together with him?" "Yesterday," Laura replied smugly. Conrad's expression was as dark as a rain cloud upon hearing Laura's words. She had a curvy, sexy figure and appearance, so it was not a surprise that she got a rich boyfriend. He always heard that rich people liked to keep pretty university girls as their sugar babies. But they only got together recently. You should beware of him, he will get rid of you once he's played with you. Conrad's tone was tinged with jealousy. He was just upset by the fact that she was suddenly better than him in the blink of an eye. You don't have to worry about this, my boyfriend is super nice to me. Last warning, stop bothering me or my boyfriend will not let you off the hook easily. Laura was tired of the conversation and hastily called a taxi at the school gate. Conrad snorted, well, let's see how good your new boyfriend is. Zelda stopped the car and got down. Chuck followed suit and was curious, why were they near the vicinity of Yvette's company? Did she really acquire Yvette's company? That was probably not it. Yvette's training company was in a strategic location, her company on the 5th floor of a plaza with a never-ending crowd. Does that mean that Zelda is intending to open a modern restaurant franchise here? As Chuck continued to ponder, Zelda finally said, I've been interested in this place for a long time, but there was no vacant shop available previously. I asked the person in charge of the shopping mall and he told me that the training company on the 5th floor was not making a profit lately. Their business was suffering a lot, and coincidentally their rental contract was about to end. I'm pretty sure that the owner of this company is going to close shop soon. I saw this opportunity and hence talked to the person in charge of the shopping mall. I'm preparing to rent that place. Chuck froze after hearing this. It was true that Yvette's company was experiencing difficulties. However, the main reason was because Yvette was not in charge personally recently. But she had already sold her house. Did this mean that she was going all in? If my shop opens, it will increase the value of this plaza, which is why the owner of this plaza is willing to charge me half the rental of that training company. He's going to invest $7 to $9 million, too. Are you interested to manage it? Zelda looked at Chuck. She didn't know how capable Chuck was, so she wanted to use this to test his mettle. If Chuck agreed to work with her, then there would be a good chance to collaborate. After all, Zelda had only met him once, but he had already left a good impression on her. Chuck was torn between agreeing and disagreeing. At the first mention of Zelda's invitation, he was already thinking to decline her since Yvette had already sold off her house in order to turn her company's fate around. Maybe she would even invest more into it. If he accepted Zelda's invitation, Yvette's loss would pile up for sure. However, at the mention of Zelda's second sentence, he understood that by giving a lot of rental fees at half price, the plaza owner was determined to make the plaza famous with Zelda's restaurant. Even if Chuck ultimately rejected her, Yvette was a goner. You can think about it. Anyways, no one has ever suffered a loss when doing business with me, Zelda sounded confident. Chuck nodded Emily and asked her if this was the matter that she wanted to tell Yvette the phone. Zelda nodded in agreement, but also shook her head, her eyes circulating Chuck slowly. Suddenly, a thought popped into her mind. After Yvette returned home, she handed the deal of the house over according to the appointed time. She packed up her last few items in the house and put it in the car, preparing to head to her new rented place. This time, she rented a house suited in a residential area in the center of the city, which was more convenient for her. When she got into the car, her phone rang. She took it out and looked at the screen. It was from the plaza management where her company was located. She was planning to arrange an appointment with the person in charge these few days to talk about her company's rental renewal, but apparently he was one step ahead of her. She answered it. Hello, Manager Yarn. Yes, I want to ask you about your company. From what I observed at the moment, your business is not doing very well, right? You can say that there is hardly any business at the moment, aren't you running on a loss? Yvette could only stay silent as a form of agreement. She could not hide this any longer. She usually had about 10 classes every week in college, so she had neglected the management of her company. She had already decided that this time, she would definitely bring her company back on the right track. Kind of, but I'm planning to. You can put your plans on hold, I want to let you know that your contract has expired. Prepare to move out soon. Manager Yarn told her coldly. What, hello? Yvette was left in shock with this news and tried to double confirm with him, but the owner had already ended the call. She fully grasped what he meant, he was kicking her out. Yvette was a little lost and anxious, what was she going to do now? Chapter 23. Yvette was a little lost and anxious, what was she going to do now? Yvette Jordan panicked. She had invested too much in this training company, even pouring her heart and soul into it. Last year, she had just refurnished it, spending around tens of thousands to customize the cabinets on the interior of the office. Last year, she spent $150,000 on the renovation, not to mention other little investments made over the year. But now, she was being forced out by the plaza's owner. It was so despairing for her that she felt that the sky was going to collapse. What was she going to do? Yvette was extremely anxious, as though someone was forcibly taking away her belongings. Her heart ached. If she chose a new address, she would have to pay $800,000 for the renovation, the rent, the deposit, and to hire a new expertise to train her workers. She already spent about $70 to $80 to pay her workers, the rent, as well as to buy some furnitures and advertise her company. She had spent quite a lot from the money that she got from selling her house, so it was really difficult for her to take so much money out. Yvette bit her lip tightly and immediately decided to drive to the company. She drove to the square and parked the car. Then, she went to buy 2 bottles of wine at a nearby store that sold cigarettes and wine before heading to find the manager of the plaza. Yvette took a deep breath and put on her widest smile before knocking on the door and entering. Manager Yarn, who has just made the call to her, glanced at her and said coldly, "What are you doing here? I've already told you what I wanted to say on the phone just now." Manager Yarn. Yvette kept smiling and put the things she bought on the table. Manager Yarn glanced at the things on the table and immediately sneered. "You'd better take them away, I'm not used to drinking such cheap wine. You'd be better off giving them to the cleaner instead." Yvette took a deep breath again and suppressed the anger in her heart. "Manager Yarn, when I met you last time, you said that we could renew the contract. Why did you change your mind now?" "When did I say that?" Manager Yarn raised his eyebrows. "Just last time, when I invited you to dinner." "Oh, that time? Let me tell you, that was the worst meal I've ever had." "What kind of meal was that? You want to bribe me with just a few $100s? Who would treat someone to a dinner like that?" he sneered. Yvette's anger rose. "Manager Yarn, you can't do this." "What do you mean? You are the most stingy among all the shop owners. It's been 5 years and you've only invited me to have 2 meals. Who do you think I am? I've been merciful to you for letting you renew the contract last time. What makes you think I'll be merciful again? Do you think it's possible? You deserve all of this. Your contract will expire at the end of this month. Remember to take all your garbage away so you can get your deposit back." Manager Yarn snorted and continued arrogantly, "Still not leaving with your rubbish? Do you seriously want to do business with only a cigarette and 2 bottles of wine? No wonder your business is so bad. Yvette, if you want to succeed, you need to know how to deal with people. If you don't even know how to deal with people, what makes you think you can continue renting the place?" Tailor Yarn, "Don't go too far." Yvette was furious. Manager Yarn continued provoking her and said, "I went too far? To tell you the truth, it's impossible for you to renew the contract. Because someone much richer than you have an eye on your place. They're so rich that they can simply throw away tens of thousands of dollars just for investing. To be honest, it's a waste of resources for that place if you rent it. The standard of our plaza has been lowered by your training company. Such a strategic place shouldn't be yours, it should belong to rich bosses like them. For a company like yours, you are better off opening a company at a warehouse in a village instead." "You," Yvette snapped in anger and annoyance. "What? I warn you, you'd better take all the things away before your contract ends. If the rich boss is not satisfied with the place, just say goodbye to your deposit." He sat down and crossed his legs. Yvette held back her urge to kick him in the shin. If she did so, she would definitely lose her deposit of $50,000. At this moment, she felt really helpless. She was bullied like this, and yet nobody was there to help her. "Still not leaving? Are you planning to have your husband make a fuss here? I warn you, if you dare to make a scene here, our boss will kill you." Manager Yarn continued to threaten. The last time Manager Yarn harassed her, she had no choice but to lie that she was married. She was bitter that her undocumented husband was actually Chuck Cannon. She admitted that she was Chuck's child bride. But what could Chuck do even if he was here? It was said that the owner of this plaza had connections with gangsters. No ordinary people could gang up against them, not to mention Chuck. However, Yvette knew that Chuck knew Zelda Main. Would she have a solution then? Zelda was a big shot in the business circle, so maybe she knew the boss of this plaza. Who knows, maybe just a word from her could help her continue her business here. Manager Yarn scoffed as Yvette was still deep in her thoughts. "I think your husband is a useless person. Otherwise, he would have come here a long time ago. Why are you even with him? You're better off with me. If you want a shop, I'll give it to you with just a flick of my fingers, and I promise to make sure you have a good time at night." Manager Yarn laughed lasciviously. "Shameless." Yvette angrily grabbed the water on the table and splashed it on Manager Yarn's face. With a splash, his face contorted. "Yvette Jordan, you're looking for trouble." He glared at Yvette as his collar was drenched with water. Yvette stared him down, still feeling slightly uneasy down. No matter how strong she was still a woman. She was about to run out with her things, but Manager Yarn raised his hand and slapped her across the face. Slap. B***TCH. Manager Yarn spat at her in disgust. Yvette's face swelled up in a mixture of rage and shame, biting on her lips so hard that they bled. The injustice that she felt turned into tears that welled up in her eyes. At this moment, how she longed for someone to help her, but she turned back and tried her best to hold back her tears with no avail. With a stream of tears rolling down her swollen cheeks, she grabbed her things and stormed out of the room. Manager Yarn wiped his face with a tissue. Such a B***TCH. If you had agreed to let me sleep with you when I offered, I could have talked to the boss about it and allowed you to continue renting the place. Who asked you to reject me like this? He spat contemptuously and continued to play with his mobile phone. Yvette went back to her company in a daze. Seeing that her face was swollen, her staff immediately asked what had happened, but Yvette shook her head and assured them that everything was fine. Secretly, she was extremely upset by what had happened. She went back to her office and wanted to call Chuck to ask him to let her go meet Zelda. She didn't know if Chuck had a good relationship with Zelda, maybe they were just friends, but a chance was still a chance for her. She took out her mobile phone and called him with determination. She was a little nervous. 10 seconds passed, but Chuck did not pick up the call. Yvette shook her head in utter disappointment. When I needed help, you could never help me. You didn't help me, even if it's just this one time, you'll never be able to. There was a look of complete disappointment. Yvette was in despair. She had utterly lost faith in him. She put down her phone, but suddenly thought of the baller on WeChat. He must know a lot of people since he's so rich, could he help her? Thinking of this, Yvette gathered her emotions again from the previous disappointment towards Chuck. Full of expectations, she sent a message to the baller. Can I ask you for a favor, baller? Baller, are you busy or? Baller, I'm sorry to disturb you. I'm sorry. There was no response for more than 10 minutes and Yvette was already in despair. As a woman, she was already under so much pressure, yet she was actually insulted and slapped by a plaza manager with no one to help her. Her self-confidence crumbled as she broke down and started crying, tears flowing uncontrollably down her face. Outside the office, the staff heard her cry and several staff members looked at each other in confusion. What was wrong with Yvette? Didn't Director Jordan get beaten now? I think so. Who could it be? Probably a man. It is normal for Director Jordan to cry. Business has been so bad recently, so we've been running on a loss. Get ready, our business is probably going to close down. I heard that our rental contract is going to expire. Director Jordan is probably going to have to give up on this business. Alas, it's a pity. It was actually pretty nice working here. The staff sighed. In the office, Yvette cried even more helplessly and more pitifully. Once again, she tried calling Chuck again. Holding back her choking and sobbing, she took out her mobile phone and dialed Chuck's number, but was once again faced with the voicemail. At this point, she had lost all faith in Chuck. Chuck, what the hell are you up to? Chapter 24. Chuck, what the hell are you up to? While Yvette Jordan was crying in despair, Chuck Cannon was in a dilemma. He didn't feel so good as Zelda Main brought him to a strange place. Sister Zelda, what are you? Chuck was really helpless. He thought that Zelda had something important to show him on the phone and wondered what it was. Never did he expect the important issue to be Zelda's best friend's birthday party. What does this mean? What kind of status was Chuck required to have to attend Zelda's best friend's birthday party? Just do me a favor. My best friend has been matchmaking me with others. If I bring you with me, she will know and stop. Ah, Sister Zelda is still single? Chuck noticed something important. Zelda was around 27 to 28 years old, the prime of her age. She was pretty, rich, and had a graceful aura topped with an amazing figure. How could such a perfect woman be single? He couldn't understand. There should be a lot of people chasing after her, right? Could it be that Zelda's requirements for a boyfriend were too high? Yes, I've always been single, and I think I'll always be single in the future, Zelda clarified. Always? Sister Zelda, aren't you going to get married and have kids? Chuck was really surprised. Did she want to stay single? Zelda has good genes, so it would really be a waste not to have any children. Why do I have to get married? I'm fine on my own, and I'm not interested in men anyways, Zelda shook her head. Ah, Chuck was once again shocked by what she said. Was she a lesbian? Sister Zelda, do you like women? Chuck asked curiously. No, I don't like women and I don't like men. I just see through them and think it's better to be single. Zelda said. Alright, Chuck still thought it was a pity. To be honest, though, there were not many men that could be a match for a beautiful woman like Zelda. It was better for her to be single than for her to lower her status and marry someone else. However, at the same time, Chuck understood what she meant. Since it was her best friend's birthday, many friends of Zelda would attend too. For now, Chuck would have to be Zelda's excuse. He didn't mind anyway. Do you agree? Zelda smiled. Chuck sighed. Now that they were here, he had no choice but to agree. Yes, thank you. I won't let you help me in vain. I can promise you a request, Zelda said earnestly. Is there a limit to this request? Chuck asked subconsciously. If that was the case, it would not be so bad. Don't think too much, Zelda added. Well, he did think too much just now. After all, Zelda's figure was so alluring to the point that he couldn't help but have indecent thoughts. Okay, let me think about it. No problem, let's get out here, Zelda said with a smile. Chuck opened the door and got out. The place that he was at was a very high-class restaurant. It was different from Zelda's restaurant, which was a place for lovers to meet and eat. This restaurant was an extravagant place to hold large gatherings, resembling that of a nightclub. There were lots of luxury cars at the door, such as BMWs, Mercedes-Benzes, Ferraris and so on. It was really a rich circle. It was the first time for Chuck to attend such an occasion. Truthfully, he was still a little nervous, but soon his confidence took over and his expression calmed. He could afford these cars. What was there to be nervous about? Zelda couldn't help but blink at Chuck's transformation. She was impressed at his composure. Seems that Chuck was a rich person who had seen and experienced many different occasions. Opening the trunk, Zelda took out a well-wrapped gift box. It suddenly dawned on Chuck that it wasn't really nice of him to not bring anything to someone's birthday party. It's okay, you're my boyfriend, your gift is my gift. Zelda tried to comfort him, but her words came out weirdly. Chuck nodded awkwardly. Take it, Zelda smiled and motioned Chuck to take the gift box. Of course, Chuck did as she said. It was not heavy, so it was probably a watch, bracelet or some kind of luxurious gift. He took out his mobile phone to check the time and found that there were 2 missed calls. He opened them without much thinking and found that they were from Yvette. Chuck was puzzled. Why was she calling him? Since he had switched his phone to silent mode, he didn't hear a thing just now. She must have called to reprimand him just now. Chuck sighed and noticed that there were a few messages on WeChat. He wanted to open them to check, but, we're here now. Stop playing with your phone, Zelda said. Chuck nodded and put the phone in his pocket. Chuck followed Zelda into a private room, where he was pleasantly surprised by the luxurious interior design of the room. It was very lively inside and there were a lot of people. With just one glance, Chuck noticed Zelda's best friend who was throwing the party. She was a beautiful woman with short hair. Her age was similar to Zelda's, but the way she dressed was much bolder and revealing. Her extremely short denim shorts immediately allowed others a glimpse of her supple thighs. She wore a low-collar tank top to match it off, and her figure could only be described as bold and daring. Chuck was surprised. She was too open for his liking. Her boyfriend would definitely have to withstand the temptation every day by just looking at her. Here comes beautiful Lady Mayne. The short-haired beauty came over with a smile, and her eyes suddenly scanned Chuck from top to bottom. This man is too young for you. Zelda scoffed and rolled her eyes at her. Some basic introductions. This is my good friend, Quincy Lowy, and this is my boyfriend, Chuck Cannon. Chuck glanced at Zelda. She paused when she introduced him. She was probably not used to it. Really? Quincy was surprised. The others also gathered around Chuck and stared curiously at him. Chuck was dressed in simple clothes but had quite a good-looking hairstyle. He didn't look out of place at all despite standing amongst all of them. On the contrary, his indifference was astonishing to the others around him. Who was this person? Why didn't they know him? Of course, it's true. I don't have to lie to you. Zelda shook her head. I know that you have a good standard. I've introduced you to some guys before. They aren't as handsome as him, that's for sure, but isn't he too young? Quincy asked in a strange way. Yes, you really changed your taste. He is too young. Are you looking for a college student to be your boyfriend? Another beautiful woman smiled slyly. Haha, that's probably the case. Isn't the beautiful Lady Mayne someone who wants to be single? How could she suddenly have a boyfriend? This is so suspicious. Zelda was speechless with the words of the women and tried to convince them. This is really my boyfriend. I don't believe it. Haha, I don't believe it too. Unless the two of you kiss in front of us. Haha, that's a good idea. Kiss, kiss. Zelda's expression was immediately unnatural. Chuck was also equally embarrassed. How could this group of beautiful women be so slick? It seems that Zelda, who used to be alone, was really suspicious to bring a man in all of a sudden. Stop it, I'm not as open as you. Zelda frowned and shook her head. How can this be called open? It's just a kiss. Hurry up, don't be a wet blanket. Quincy giggled. Zelda sighed. She really didn't expect these friends of hers to act like this and looked at Chuck awkwardly. She had only known him for 2 days. Even if he was just a simple friend, Zelda didn't really want to allow a simple friend like him kiss her. She had planned to come here alone, but after seeing Chuck, who just had a makeover, she had to admit that he was a little handsome. Therefore, she suddenly had the idea of asking him to be her partner for the night. After all, his aura and composure were indeed suited for a person like her. By bringing Chuck with her, her other friends would hence be less suspicious. Who knew things would turn out this way? What were they going to do? Zelda stared at Chuck, seemingly trying to get an idea. Chapter 25. Who knew things would turn out this way? What were they going to do? Zelda stared at Chuck, seemingly trying to get an idea. Zelda Main's expression returned to normal. To be honest, she didn't know what to do just now. Even if Chuck Cannon kissed her or touched her, she couldn't react. After all, she was the one who brought him here. However, when Chuck placed his hand on her hip just now, his hand was stiff and he didn't take advantage of her. This satisfied Zelda. If he had taken this chance to take advantage of her, then after the meal, the two of them would be strangers. Chuck noticed the look in Zelda's eyes and was relieved. He was glad that he didn't do anything wrong just now. Otherwise, the consequences would be serious. The two of them looked at each other in silence. Well, everyone, don't just stand there. Sit down and have a drink. Quincy Lowy broke the silence by inviting everyone to take a seat. Chuck was indeed slightly hungry, so he proceeded to eat the minute he sat down. Meanwhile, Zelda started chatting away with Quincy and the others about almost anything they thought of. Well, it was typical of women to be so chatty anyways. Chuck's hair stood on end as he listened in to their conversation. Perhaps they were older and all still single. Their conversation was focused around relationship issues. The conversation made Zelda uncomfortable, so she only made small talk and responded slightly. Otherwise, they would continue to talk about such a topic. Similarly, Chuck pretended that he didn't hear anything and continued to eat. Otherwise, what could he do? He was also very desperate. Hey Chuck, what does your family do? Quincy suddenly directed a question at him. The other women all turned their eyes to him, including Zelda, who had a curious look on her face. I'm not sure. Chuck could only shake his head wryly. His mother didn't say what her job is, and he only knew his mother was a baller. You don't know? Then why do you drive a BMW 7 Series? Does your family own a mine? Quincy was puzzled after hearing his reply. After all, no one in their circle knew Chuck. Therefore, when she just heard Zelda say that Chuck drove a BMW 7 Series, she was surprised. When did a rich kid show up in town? Of course not. My family could never own a mine. Chuck shook his head. It was hardly possible. His mother has been abroad all the time, so she probably earned money by doing business abroad. In that case, I'm really curious about your family's business. Quincy said. I'm curious too. Me too. As the women continued chatting away, Chuck could only sigh helplessly. Was his family business really so intriguing? Chuck could only smile and continue to deal with it. Fortunately, Zelda noticed Chuck's limit and immediately changed the subject. Right at the moment, a young man dressed in expensive clothes pushed the door open and came in. He seemed to be late and shouted, "Someone definitely owns a mine. Who is driving a BMW 7 Series worth more than $2 million? It's him, Chuck Cannon, the boyfriend of the beautiful lady Zelda Main." Quincy pointed to Chuck, who was eating. The young man glanced at Chuck and chuckled. Really? I just came out of the parking lot, but I didn't see any car that resembles a BMW 7 Series? Didn't see anything? Quincy was surprised, and the other beautiful women were also shocked. When they heard that Chuck owned a car whose price was at more than $2 million, they were amazed. This was because he looked merely like a college student, yet he was able to afford such an expensive car. If so, how rich would his family need to be? The answer was clear. How could it be possible for a college student to spend so much without having a family with at least a few $100 million net worth? Yes, it was strange that I didn't see it. The young man, whose name was Wilbur Wendell, smiled. He was here only to flirt with girls, so he was surprised when he heard someone drove a car worth $2 million. I just bought it. There was some scratches, so I sent it for repair. Chuck explained promptly. You're a newbie, right? since only newbies will accidentally damage their cars. Wilbur sneered at Chuck. Well, it's my first time buying a car, Chuck replied. Hearing Chuck's reply, Wilbur felt even more delighted. He smiled and said, if it's your first time buying a car, you should be careful since you know close to nothing about cars. The BMW 7 Series is driven by middle-aged people. Young people like us just have a Cayenne. They are easy to maneuver, fast-moving and stunning, just like my new car. I love it so much. Cayenne? How much is it? Chuck asked subconsciously. What, haven't you heard of the Cayenne? Wilbur scoffed at Chuck. An odd look crossed over the faces of Quincy and all the other women present, while Zelda frowned. No, Chuck Cannon shook his head. He paid little attention to cars and only knew about BMW and Benz cars. Bro, you are too ignorant to not have heard of Cayenne. Doesn't your family own a mine? You should pay more attention to this, Wilbur smirked. My household doesn't own a mine. Chuck shook his head and denied it. You don't? I thought someone said your family owns a mine? Wilbur chuckled. I said it. Quincy raised her hand. Not anyone can own a mine. My dad knows many big figures who own mines, but I've never heard of a Cannon who owns a mine. What does your family do for a living then? I don't know, Chuck answered. Haha, you don't know? You really are too low profile. By the way, you asked me how much the Cayenne costs just now, right? It costs around $2 million. To you, it might be small figure to pay. Wilbur commented snarkily. Oh, that's great. Chuck continued to chew on his food. Great? How about we order one in a few days? I can pull a few strings and give you a discount. Wilbur offered cunningly. He really didn't like Chuck at all because he just heard that he was Zelda's boyfriend. He had confessed to her before, and was rejected, and now she was with Chuck. In that case, didn't it mean that he was not as good as Chuck? As a standard rich kid, would he really be subservient to Chuck, whom he had never heard of before? Chuck was speechless and thought, why is this guy targeting me? I didn't provoke him, did I? But I can afford a car whose price is less than $2 million, but there's no need for me to buy one now. Wilbur can think whatever he wants. No need for that. Chuck rejected his offer politely. Chuck's car is much better than a Cayenne, and it's also a new car. Why should he but a brand new one? Zelda tried to defend Chuck. Lady Mayne, everyone here has several cars. Do you think one car is enough? Of course, it isn't. In his situation, if his car is sent for repairs, he will have no cars left to drive. It's so embarrassing to ride with others. Wilbur taunted. At this point, Zelda was already slightly annoyed. Are you here to attend the birthday party or to talk about cars? Both. Wilbur felt comfortable now. He took out an exquisitely packaged box and said, Beautiful Lady Loie, happy 26th birthday. Quincy accepted the gift with a smile. Why don't I send you back later? You can have a feel of the Cayenne since you've never tried it before, Wilbur suggested sarcastically. No, thanks. I'll go back in Zelda's car later. Chuck said, like I said, you should buy one more car. How awkward is it now? It won't cost you much money if you buy one more car, at least it will be more convenient. Wilbur smiled genuinely. He felt satisfied looking at Chuck's ignorance and thought to himself, is this kid even rich? I've never heard of a rich kid who hasn't heard of the car brand Cayenne before. Is this guy pretending to be rich? If he was pretending and putting on airs, then he had the obligation to expose his lies. Wilbur snicked in amusement as he saw Chuck actually speechless and staring at his phone. He walked over and patted Chuck on the shoulder. Bro, what do you think? I know somebody. How about I ask him to order a Cayenne for you? For people like us, we need to have at least 2 cars. However, Chuck slapped his hand away. Stop bothering me. He stared at the phone in his hand, scanning through Yvette Jordan's messages quickly. She was in trouble. Who was it that dared bullied his wifey? Chuck swore that he would crush them. Chuck turned to stare at Wilbur, who was standing in front of him, and thought, well, if you want to embarrass me, I'll take care of you first, then leave to find Yvette.